Chosen one, what I'm about to reveal to you will completely transform how you understand this season of isolation you've been experiencing. Because right now, in this very moment, while you're feeling alone, while you're questioning why relationships have fallen away, while you're wondering why doors have closed and circles have shrunk and connections have dissolved, something profound is happening in the spiritual realm that your human eyes cannot yet see. You weren't abandoned. You were strategically positioned. You weren't rejected. You were divinely protected. You weren't forgotten. You were intentionally isolated for reasons so significant, so transformative, so absolutely critical to your destiny that heaven itself orchestrated your separation. This isn't punishment. This isn't abandonment. This isn't evidence that you did something wrong or that God has turned away from you. This is preparation. This is protection. This is the most intense season of spiritual development you will ever experience. And it's happening in the silence, in the solitude, in the sacred space of isolation where God can work on you without interference, mold you without distraction, transform you without interruption from people who don't understand what you're becoming. Tonight you're going to understand exactly why God pulled you away from everything and everyone familiar. You're going to see the 7 specific reasons heaven orchestrated your isolation. You're going to comprehend why this season, as painful as it feels, as lonely as it seems, as difficult as it is to endure, is actually the greatest gift God could give you right now. Because what's being built in you during this isolation will carry you for the rest of your life. What's being forged in you during this separation will define your legacy. What's being developed in you during this solitude will determine the magnitude of your impact. They say it's lonely at the top. But they don't tell you it's lonely in the preparation for the top. They don't explain that before you rise to heights that change generations, you must first descend into depths of isolation that challenge everything you thought you knew about connection, relationship, belonging. They don't warn you that God's greatest warriors, His most powerful chosen ones, His world changers and history makers, they all went through seasons where heaven pulled them away, stripped them of familiar comforts, isolated them completely so something new could be built without the contamination of old patterns, old thinking, old limitations. Moses spent 40 years in the wilderness before he could lead a nation out of bondage. Jesus spent 40 days in the desert before he began his ministry that would transform human history. Paul spent years in isolation after his conversion before he wrote letters that would shape Christianity for millennia. David was alone with sheep in fields before he became the greatest king Israel ever knew. Joseph was isolated in prison before he rose to second in command of the most powerful nation on earth. Every single one of them went through isolation. Every single one of them experienced the pulling away. Every single one of them endured seasons where God removed them from everything familiar, everyone comfortable, every situation they could have leaned on instead of learning to lean fully on divine strength, divine wisdom, divine provision. And you, chosen one, you are walking in their footsteps, following their pattern, experiencing their process. This isolation isn't random, this separation isn't accidental, this pulling away isn't coincidental. God doesn't do anything without purpose, without reason, without strategic intention aligned with your ultimate destiny. So let's examine the 7 reasons why heaven orchestrated your isolation, why divine forces pulled you away, why cosmic wisdom determined you needed to be alone right now. Reason 1. To kill your dependency on people. You were too dependent on human validation, human approval, human presence. You needed people too much. You relied on their opinions too heavily. You measured your worth by their acceptance too completely. And God knew that as long as you were surrounded by people whose approval you craved, whose validation you needed, whose presence you depended on, you would never fully step into the power of your divine identity, the strength of your authentic self, the freedom of your true calling. People are beautiful. Relationships are important. Community is valuable. But when you need people to feel okay, when you require human presence to feel stable, when you depend on external validation to feel worthy, you've given them power over you that only God should have. Authority over your emotional state that only divine presence should possess. Control over your sense of self that only heaven should determine. God had to remove the people so you would discover that you're okay without them. He had to strip away the relationships so you would find that you're complete without external validation. He had to isolate you so you would learn that your worth isn't determined by who accepts you. Your value isn't established by who approves of you. Your identity isn't defined by who validates you. In the isolation, you're discovering something profound. You can be alone without being lonely. You can be separated without being sad. You can be isolated without being empty. This discovery is revolutionary because it means people can no longer control you through their presence or absence, manipulate you through their approval or rejection, influence you through their acceptance or denial. You're learning to find your validation in God alone, to discover your worth in divine perspective, to establish your identity in heavenly truth rather than human opinion. This is liberation. This is freedom. This is the foundation of unshakable confidence, authentic power, genuine strength that no human can grant and therefore no human can take away. God is killing your dependency on people. He's destroying your need for human approval. He's eliminating your reliance on external validation. And yes, it's painful. Yes, it's uncomfortable. Yes, it feels like death because something is dying. The version of you that needed people too much, that gave humans too much power, that depended on external sources for internal stability. But what's dying needed to die. What's being killed needed to be eliminated. What's being destroyed needed to be removed. Because the version of you that's emerging from this isolation, the person you're becoming in this solitude, the being you're transforming into through this separation, this version doesn't need people to feel complete, doesn't require human presence to feel stable, doesn't depend on external validation to know their worth. This new you, this isolated you, this alone with God you, this is the version that can handle the destiny awaiting you, can manage the calling assigned to you, can fulfill the purpose ordained for you. Because your destiny is too big to be controlled by people who might withdraw their support. Your calling is too important to be influenced by humans who might revoke their approval. Your purpose is too significant to depend on relationships that might end. God is making you people-proof. He's developing you into someone who appreciates people without needing them, who values relationships without depending on them, who enjoys connections without requiring them for stability. This is maturity. This is evolution. This is transformation that can only happen in isolation, that can only develop in solitude, that can only emerge in separation from the very people you thought you couldn't live without. Reason 2. To remove contamination from your circle. You were surrounded by people who weren't supposed to be there. Your circle was contaminated with presences that were draining you, relationships that were limiting you, connections that were hindering you. They weren't all bad people. Some were good people who were just wrong for your season. Some were supportive in the past but toxic in the present. Some meant well, but their energy, their mindset, their limitations were contaminating what God was trying to build in you. God couldn't elevate you with them attached. He couldn't promote you with them in your circle. He couldn't expand you with them occupying space in your life. So he pulled you away. He orchestrated circumstances that created distance. He allowed situations that generated separation. Not to punish you, but to position you. Not to hurt you, but to help you. Not to isolate you permanently, but to purify your circle before bringing you back into connection with people who are actually aligned with your next level. Some of those people were energy vampires. They took more than they gave. They drained more than they deposited. They extracted more than they invested. Every Interaction left you feeling depleted, exhausted, tired in ways you couldn't quite explain because the drain was spiritual. The extraction was energetic. The depletion was happening in dimensions you couldn't see but definitely could feel. Others were dream killers. They didn't believe in your vision. They couldn't see what you saw. They doubted what you knew was true. And their doubt, even when they didn't speak it out loud, their skepticism, even when they tried to hide it behind fake support, their disbelief, even when they masked it with polite encouragement, it was poisoning your faith, contaminating your confidence, polluting your certainty about what God was calling you to do. Then there were the ceiling people. These are people who had reached their maximum capacity, who had stopped growing, who had settled into comfort zones they would never leave. And they unconsciously, sometimes even consciously, tried to pull you down to their level, tried to make you settle for their ceiling, tried to convince you that their limitations were universal rather than personal. Ceiling people don't want you to go higher because your elevation exposes their stagnation. Your growth highlights their comfort. Your willingness to push boundaries reveals their decision to stay safe. They don't hate you necessarily. They just can't handle the mirror of your ambition reflecting their complacency. The contrast of your courage revealing their fear, the difference between your faith and their doubt. God looked at your circle and saw contamination. He saw energy drainers positioned as close friends. He saw dream killers operating as family members. He saw ceiling people disguised as supporters, and he knew that with them in your life, you would never become who you're meant to be, never accomplish what you're destined to achieve, never fulfill the assignment that has your name written on it in heaven's registry. So he removed them. Not all at once necessarily. Sometimes it was gradual. Relationships cooling off, connections fading, people becoming busy, distant, unavailable. Other times it was sudden. Betrayals that revealed true nature. Conflicts that exposed hidden agendas. Situations that brought darkness into the light where you could finally see what had been there all along, but you were too close, too loyal, too hopeful to recognize. And now, you're alone. Your circle has shrunk. Your contacts list is shorter. Your social calendar is emptier. And it hurts. It feels like loss. It seems like abandonment. But chosen one, this isn't loss. This is liberation. This isn't abandonment. This is purification. God didn't take people away to leave you empty. He removed contamination to prepare you for the right connections, the aligned relationships, the people who are actually supposed to walk with you into your next season. Your new circle is being formed right now. Your future tribe is being identified. Your next level connections are being prepared. But they couldn't come into a contaminated space. They couldn't fit into a full circle. They couldn't connect with you while you were still attached to people who were never meant to go where you're going. The isolation is the transition period. The separation is the cleansing phase. The solitude is the preparation space. God is making room for new relationships by removing old ones, creating space for aligned connections by eliminating misaligned ones, preparing your circle for next-level people by purging current-level people who were actually past-level people, overstaying their season in your life. Reason 3. To develop your identity independent of roles. You were too identified with your roles, too attached to your titles, too defined by your positions. You were a mother, a father, a friend, a colleague, a leader, a helper, a supporter, a fixer. And those roles, while valid, while important, while meaningful, they were consuming your identity, eclipsing your essence, hiding the true you beneath layers of what you did for others, who you were to others, how you served others. God needed to strip away the roles so you could discover who you are beneath them. He needed to remove the titles so you could find your identity beyond them. He needed to isolate you from the people who related to you only through your roles, so you could meet yourself, know yourself, become yourself independent of what you do for others. In the isolation, nobody needs you to be anything. Nobody requires you to perform any role. Nobody expects you to maintain any title. You're just you. Raw, unperformed, unadorned with roles and titles and positions. And at first, this feels like death because you don't know who you are without your roles. You don't recognize yourself without your titles. You feel lost without the positions that gave you purpose, meaning, identity. But this uncomfortable space, this identity crisis, this role-less season, this is where true self-discovery happens. This is where authentic identity emerges. This is where you meet the real you who existed before you took on all these roles, who remains after the roles are stripped away, who will persist when the roles eventually change. You're discovering that you're not what you do. You're not who you are to others. You're not the sum total of your roles and titles and positions. You're a soul, a spirit, a divine being having a human experience. You're a chosen one with an assignment that transcends any single role. You're a carrier of purpose that's bigger than any title you've held or position you've occupied. God is developing your identity independent of roles because your next season will require you to hold multiple roles, carry various titles, occupy different positions. And if your identity is wrapped up in any single role, you'll fall apart when that role changes. You'll lose yourself when that title shifts. You'll experience crisis when that position transforms. But if your identity is rooted in God, grounded in divine truth about who you are, established in eternal perspective rather than temporary roles, then you can flow through different seasons, adapt to changing positions, transition through various roles without ever losing yourself, without ever forgetting who you are, without ever questioning your worth independent of what you do. The isolation is teaching you that you're valuable because you exist, not because you perform. You're worthy because God created you, not because you fulfill roles for others. You're significant because heaven chose you for assignment, not because people need you to be something for them. This is revolutionary, this is liberating, this is the foundation of sustainable identity that doesn't collapse when roles change, doesn't crumble when positions shift, doesn't disappear when titles are stripped away. You're being built on solid foundation, divine truth about who you are independent of any role you might play in any person's life. Reason 4. To heal what crowds were masking. You were using people as distraction from pain, staying busy with relationships to avoid feeling wounds, surrounding yourself with noise to drown out the voice of unhealed trauma, unprocessed grief, unaddressed pain that lived in you like background static you learned to ignore but never actually silenced. God knew that as long as you had people around, as long as you stayed busy with relationships, as long as you maintained the noise and activity and distraction of social connection, you would never face the pain that needed to be faced, never process the trauma that needed to be processed, never heal the wounds that needed to be healed. So he pulled you away. He removed the distractions, he eliminated the noise, he created silence, solitude, stillness where there's nothing to do but feel. Nowhere to run but inward, no escape but through. And in this isolation, everything you've been avoiding is rising to the surface. Every pain you've been pushing down is demanding attention. Every wound you've been ignoring is crying out for healing. This is uncomfortable, this is painful. This hurts in ways that make you want to run back to the crowds, back to the relationships, back to the distractions that helped you avoid feeling what you're feeling now. But chosen one, you can't heal what you won't feel. You can't process what you won't face. You can't overcome what you won't acknowledge. The isolation is forced confrontation with everything you've been running from. The solitude is mandatory processing of everything you've been avoiding. The separation is divine intervention creating space for healing that crowds were preventing. Processing that busyness was blocking. Transformation that noise was drowning out. God is healing you in the isolation. He's addressing wounds that needed attention but never got it because you stayed too busy to feel them. He's processing trauma that needed release but never found it because you stayed too distracted to face it. He's transforming pain that needed to be alchemized but never was because you stayed too surrounded to acknowledge it. This healing hurts. This processing is painful. This transformation is uncomfortable. But it's necessary. It's critical. It's essential to your next level because you can't carry unhealed wounds into your destiny. You can't bring unprocessed trauma into your calling. You can't transport unaddressed pain into your purpose. Your destiny requires a healed you. Your calling demands a whole you. Your purpose needs an integrated you who has faced your shadows, processed your pain, healed your wounds, transformed your trauma. And that healing, that processing, that transformation, it can only happen in isolation, in solitude, in the quiet space where there's no distraction from the work that needs to be done inside you. The crowds were masking symptoms but not creating healing. Relationships were providing temporary relief but not producing lasting transformation. Busyness was offering momentary escape but not facilitating actual processing. God removed all of it so real healing could happen, deep transformation could occur, lasting change could manifest. You're emerging from this isolation different, not just older but healed, not just wiser but whole. Not just changed, but transformed. The wounds that were running your life subconsciously are being healed consciously. The trauma that was driving your behavior unconsciously is being processed deliberately. The pain that was limiting your capacity invisibly is being transformed visibly. This is the gift of isolation. This is the purpose of separation. This is why God pulled you away. So you could heal what crowds were masking, process what busyness was preventing, transform what noise was drowning out. And when you emerge, when you return, when you reconnect, you'll be healed in ways that make you powerful, whole in ways that make you free, transformed in ways that make you unstoppable. Reason 5. To establish your direct connection with God. You are hearing God through too many middlemen. Too many interpreters, too many filters. You needed people to tell you what God was saying. You relied on others to confirm what heaven was communicating. You depended on external sources to validate what divine presence was revealing. God couldn't have a direct relationship with you while you were using people as mediators, while you were making humans your primary source of spiritual guidance, while you were trusting other people's connection with heaven more than your own. So he removed the middlemen. He eliminated the interpreters. He stripped away the filters. In the isolation, it's just you and God. No pastor to tell you what heaven is saying. No prophet to interpret what God is revealing. No friend to confirm what divine presence is communicating. Just you and direct connection with the divine. Just you and unfiltered access to heavenly wisdom. Just you and immediate relationship with cosmic intelligence. At first, this terrified you. You didn't trust your ability to hear God directly. You doubted your capacity to discern divine voice from your own thoughts. You questioned whether you were worthy of unmediated connection with heaven. So you reached out to people. You looked for confirmation. You sought external validation of what you were sensing internally. But nobody was available. Nobody could give you what you were looking for. Nobody provided the confirmation you wanted, and slowly, gradually, reluctantly, you started trusting your direct connection, believing your own discernment, following your internal guidance without external confirmation. This is what God wanted. This is what heaven needed. This is why you were isolated. To develop direct connection with divine source, to establish unmediated relationship with God, to build confidence in your ability to hear heaven without human interpreters. You're discovering that God speaks to you, that divine wisdom flows to you, that heavenly guidance comes directly to you. You don't need middlemen. You don't require interpreters. You don't depend on filters. You have direct access, immediate connection, unmediated relationship with the divine. This direct connection is crucial for your next season because where you're going, you won't have time to consult committees, to gather opinions, to seek external confirmation for every decision. You'll need to hear God yourself, discern divine direction directly, follow heavenly guidance immediately without waiting for human validation. God is establishing your direct connection in the isolation. He's developing your ability to hear Him clearly without noise of other voices. He's building your confidence in receiving His guidance without confirmation from human sources. He's training you to trust your direct connection more than indirect information, to value your unmediated relationship more than filtered communication through others. This doesn't mean you'll never receive wisdom from people again. It doesn't mean community isn't valuable. It doesn't mean you should ignore all external guidance. But it means you'll never again depend on people to tell you what God is saying. Never again require human confirmation to trust divine communication. Never again make others your primary source when you have direct access to the ultimate source. Your direct connection with God, established in isolation, will carry you through every season ahead. When people aren't available, you'll hear heaven directly. When circumstances are confusing, you'll receive clarity immediately. When decisions are urgent, you'll access wisdom instantly. Because you're not dependent on middlemen, not reliant on interpreters, not waiting for human confirmation of what divine presence is already communicating directly to your spirit. Reason 6. To prepare you for a platform you can't handle with crowd mentality. God is preparing you for influence, for visibility, for platform, for leadership. For a level of impact where crowds will gather, where multitudes will watch, where thousands or millions will be affected by your words, your actions, your presence. But you weren't ready for that platform. Your mindset was still crowd-dependent. Your psychology was still people-pleasing. Your emotional state was still validation-seeking. If God had given you the platform while you still needed crowd approval, you would have become a slave to public opinion. If He had elevated you while you still craved human validation, you would have sacrificed your authenticity for acceptance. If He had given you influence while you still feared rejection, you would have compromised your message to maintain popularity. So He isolated you first. He pulled you away from crowds before giving you a platform that would attract crowds. He developed your independence from public opinion before placing you in public view. He established your confidence in divine approval before subjecting you to human evaluation. In the isolation, you're learning not to need the crowd's approval, not to require their validation, not to depend on their acceptance. You're developing the internal stability to stand before thousands without needing their applause, to speak truth without fearing their rejection, to be authentic without craving their validation. This preparation is crucial because the platform waiting for you is massive. The influence assigned to you is significant. The leadership role prepared for you is substantial. And with great platform comes great pressure to please crowds, to water down truth, to compromise authenticity for acceptance. But you're being inoculated against that pressure in the isolation. You're developing immunity to crowd mentality. You're building resistance to people-pleasing. So when you step onto the platform, when crowds gather, when multitudes watch, you won't be controlled by their opinions, manipulated by their approval, influenced by their validation. You'll stand on the platform with the same independence you developed in isolation. You'll speak to crowds with the same authenticity you discovered in solitude. You'll lead multitudes with the same divine-centered confidence you built in separation. Because the platform doesn't change who you became in isolation. The crowds don't erase what you learned in solitude. The visibility doesn't undo the transformation that happened in hiddenness. God is preparing you for a platform in the isolation. He's developing platform-ready character in the hiddenness. He's building public stage strength in the private season. So when he brings you out, when he elevates you, when he positions you in visibility, you'll handle it with maturity that can only be developed in isolation, with wisdom that can only be discovered in solitude, with strength that can only be forged in separation. The isolation is platform preparation. The solitude is influence development. The separation is leadership training. God isn't keeping you hidden forever. He's developing you in hiddenness so you can handle the exposure that's coming. Building you in solitude so you can manage the crowds that will gather, strengthening you in isolation so you can steward the platform that's being prepared. Reason 7. To birth what can only be conceived in isolation. Something is being birthed in you that could only be conceived in isolation. A vision, a ministry, a business, a book, a message, a movement, a revolution. Something so significant, so powerful, so world-changing that it required complete separation from external input, total isolation from human interference, absolute solitude for divine impartation. God is planting seeds in your spirit that need the quiet to germinate, the stillness to take root, the solitude to grow without being trampled by other people's opinions, doubted by others' skepticism, limited by others' vision of what's possible. This thing being conceived in you during isolation is unprecedented. It's unique. It's yours alone to birth. In the crowds, everyone had opinions about what you should do, ideas about how you should move, suggestions about where you should go. Their voices, even when well-meaning, were drowning out the still small voice of divine direction, the whispered wisdom of heavenly instruction, the subtle guidance of cosmic intelligence. God needed to remove all those voices so you could hear the one voice that matters. His voice speaking about your assignment, His wisdom revealing your next steps, His guidance directing your unique path that no one else can walk, no one else can understand. No one else can fully grasp until you birth it and show them what was always meant to come through you. In the isolation, the vision is becoming clear. The assignment is being revealed. The details are being downloaded. You're receiving revelation that you couldn't receive in the crowd. Understanding that you couldn't access with people around. Wisdom that you couldn't hear through the noise of other voices, other opinions, other perspectives. This isolation is your pregnancy season. You're carrying something that's growing in the quiet, developing in the stillness, forming in the solitude. It's not ready to be shared yet. It's not prepared to be revealed yet. It's still in conception phase, gestation period, formation stage. If you try to birth it prematurely, if you share it too soon, if you reveal it before it's ready, the world will misunderstand it. People will misinterpret it. Crowds will try to shape it into something familiar rather than allowing it to emerge as the unprecedented thing it's meant to be. God is protecting what's being conceived in you by keeping you isolated. He's defending what's being birthed through you by maintaining your separation. He's guarding what's being revealed to you by sustaining your solitude. Because what you're carrying is too precious to be exposed to premature evaluation, too powerful to be subjected to uninformed opinions, too significant to be limited by others' understanding of what's possible. The isolation is your incubation period. The solitude is your gestation chamber. The separation is your formation space. And when the time is right, when what's being conceived is fully formed, when what's being birthed is ready to emerge, God will end the isolation, conclude the separation, bring you out of solitude with something so powerful, so transformative, so unprecedented that everyone who doubted your isolation will understand why it was necessary. Everyone who questioned your separation will comprehend why it was required. Everyone who wondered about your solitude will recognize why it was essential. You're not isolated because God forgot you. You're isolated because God is forming something in you that requires His exclusive attention, demands His undistracted focus, needs His sole input without interference from human voices. This is holy ground. This is sacred space. This is divine workshop where heaven is crafting something through you that will change everything for someone, transform everything for many, revolutionize everything for multitudes. Protect this season, honor this isolation, respect this solitude. Don't rush to end it prematurely. Don't force yourself back into crowds before the work is complete. Don't reconnect before the conception is finished. The gestation is done, the formation is ready for birth. Trust God's timing. Trust the process. Trust that when what's being birthed in you is ready, the isolation will end naturally. The separation will conclude divinely. The solitude will finish purposefully. And you'll emerge from this isolation carrying something the world has never seen. Birthing something that will impact generations, revealing something that will change paradigms, shift consciousness, transform realities. This is why you were pulled away. This is why you're isolated. This is why you're alone. To birth what can only be conceived in isolation, to bring forth what can only be formed in solitude, to manifest what can only be developed in separation from everything and everyone that would interfere with the divine work being done in you and through you right now. Conclusion: the end of isolation is coming. Chosen one, your isolation season has an expiration date. Your solitude has a predetermined end. Your separation is temporary, not permanent. God pulled you away for specific reasons, and when those reasons have been fulfilled, when the purposes have been accomplished, when the work has been completed, He will bring you back out. You won't be isolated forever. This isn't your permanent state. This isn't your final destination. This is a season, a chapter, a phase that's necessary for your development but not intended for your eternity. The isolation will end. The solitude will conclude. The separation will finish, but you won't emerge the same. You won't return unchanged. You won't reconnect as the old you. You'll come out different, transformed, evolved, upgraded. The person who enters isolation is not the person who exits isolation. The soul who goes into solitude is not the soul who emerges from solitude. The being who experiences separation is not the being who completes separation. You're being transformed in the isolation, healed in the solitude, elevated in the separation. Every day alone is a day of development. Every moment of quiet is a moment of growth. Every season of separation is a season of transformation. Nothing is wasted. Nothing is random. Nothing is meaningless. Your dependency on people is being killed. Contamination is being removed from your circle. Your identity, independent of roles, is being developed. Wounds that crowds were masking are being healed. Your direct connection with God is being established. You're being prepared for a platform you couldn't handle with crowd mentality. Something unprecedented is being conceived in you that required isolation to birth. These 7 reasons explain why you're alone right now. These purposes justify why God pulled you away. These realities validate why heaven orchestrated your separation. You're not forgotten. You're not abandoned. You're not punished. You're being prepared, developed, transformed for something so significant that it required complete isolation to properly prepare you. So embrace this season. Stop fighting the solitude. Quit resisting the separation. Accept the isolation as divine gift, sacred opportunity. Holy space for transformation that can only happen when you're alone with God. When external voices are silenced, when human input is removed, when divine presence has your undivided attention. The isolation is temporary, but the transformation is permanent. The solitude will end, but the development is eternal. The separation will conclude, but the elevation is forever. What you're becoming in this isolation will serve you for the rest of your life. What you're learning in this solitude will guide you through every future season. What you're developing in this separation will sustain you through every challenge ahead. Trust the process. Trust the purpose. Trust the divine wisdom that pulled you away. Your isolation season is building something in you that will bless everyone around you when you emerge. Your solitude is forging strength that will carry multitudes. Your separation is creating capacity that will impact generations. God's isolation season, 7 reasons you were pulled away. Now you know. Now you understand. Now you can embrace rather than resist, accept rather than fight, trust rather than question. The isolation has purpose. The solitude has meaning. The separation has divine intention. And when it ends, when you emerge, when you return, the world will see why the isolation was necessary, understand why the separation was required, recognize why the solitude was essential. You weren't pulled away to be forgotten. You were isolated to be prepared. You weren't separated to be abandoned. You were removed to be transformed. This is God's isolation season, and it's producing something in you that will change everything.